Danny Savage reporting for us there. Now, a cabinet minister has been warning that Britain is under threat from a rising tide of militant secularisation. Baroness Warsi is leading a delegation to meet with the Pope. She's expected to talk about the sidelining of religion in the public sphere. In an article written for the Daily Telegraph, the Muslim peer emphasised that Europe needs to become more confident in its Christianity. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Andrew Copson, Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association. And in our Cambridge studio, we have the broadcaster Anne Atkins. Thanks to both of you for joining us here on BBC News. If I could start with you here in the studio, Andrew. David Cameron made this point last December, and Baroness Warsi is basically backing it up, that, you know, the UK is a Christian country, and we should not be afraid to say so. What is wrong with that? What's your problem with that?
Well, the first problem is that it's not factually correct by any means. To say that we're a Christian country ignores the fact that in the last British Social Attitude Survey just last year, 51% of people said they weren't religious. There are many other people in this country who are religious but not Christians. And there are many influences on our society, both in the past, pre-Christian, and in the present, non-Christian, which make the statement that we're a Christian country, the simplistic statement that we're a Christian country, untrue. OK, well, what about then the suggestion that there's a rising tide of militant secularism? That claim is totally surreal, totally surreal. We live in a country where there are more state-funded religious schools than ever before, where more public services are being contracted out to religious groups than ever before. We have a government that's proposing to keep a massive religious privilege in its parliamentary reform by keeping bishops in the House of Lords. And if anything, what we're seeing is a renewed fight from Christian lobby groups and Christianised politicians to try and extend and deepen the sort of privilege for Christianity and discrimination against other people that has been in our system.
But the High Court ruled only a few days ago that Devon Town Council had acted unlawfully in allowing prayers to be said at meetings.
Yes, that's true, because it was against the law. The Local Government Act meant that you couldn't have prayers as part of the formal agenda. But that is not militant secularism. That's an interpretation of a pre-existing law. And I think you'll find that again and again in all sorts of other legislative and legal judgments, Christianity is being favoured. It's not secularists, for example, who want exemptions from equality laws so they can discriminate against other people. It's always Christian lobby groups arguing for it.
OK, Anne Atkins, a lot to ponder over there. We're not a Christian country. As far as the Devon Town Council was concerned, the High Court got it right. They were just following the law. This idea that there's a rising tide of militant secularism is ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I have to say it is what quite a lot of people feel. Now, I should start by saying I agree with a lot of what Andrew said. I think most of us now recognise that we live in a multicultural society, and I hope most of us embrace that and enjoy it and want to hear from all the different voices. I certainly do. I love the fact that we live in a multicultural society and that there are lots of different faiths and people of no faith. But I have to say that one's experience is that there is an element of atheism. Not all atheists by any means, like Alain de Botton's book is the opposite. I don't necessarily agree with his message, but I embrace his message because it's the message of I don't believe this, but I appreciate that other people do, and I appreciate the cultural richness that gives us. That's the tolerant side of atheism. There is a very intolerant, aggressive, angry side of atheism that more and more people are experiencing and expressing concern about. And I think it's very sad, and I think it's completely unnecessary. So, I mean, if you look at a country like France, for instance, which I think is quite aggressively secularist, I don't want to go in that direction. I don't want to live in a country where schoolgirls can't wear burqas to school, or, you know, an employee can't wear a cross, because I think there is room for all of us. I want to live in a society that has a sort of muddle, that says, you know, we have got bishops in the House of Lords, but we've also got the chief rabbi in the House of Lords, and we've got a lot of other people, and this kind of works. You know, you wouldn't necessarily start from here, but it does give society a sort of tolerance and richness and variety. And if you take, for instance, the view of somebody like the Chief Rabbi, Lord Sachs, who came to this country as a little Jewish boy just after the war, his experience is that we're becoming more and more and more intolerant.
But how does this manifest itself? Give me some specific examples.
Okay, well, I'll take the example that you've just raised of... now, again, Andrew is right that it was a point of law. Fortunately, I'm very glad to say the European Court of Human Rights threw it out as ridiculous. Of course, it's not a question of denying somebody's human rights. But the point is, nothing was at stake there. You know, nobody was being forced to pray, and an awful lot of atheists have said since that ruling, this is ridiculous. All you need to do is sit quietly and enjoy the fact that there's a little bit of peace, and, you know, it isn't necessary to push people to these extremes. Or, you know, when an employee is told she can't wear a cross, or she can't wear a burqa, or people, you know, campaigning against a call to the minaret. The Bishop of Oxford is in favour of a call to the minaret in Oxfordshire because that's what a varied and interesting and tolerant society does. We don't want to go the way of Turkey or France or America, indeed, which is incredibly intolerant in some ways of religion. And yet religion, the religion there is also in some ways more strident.
Okay, let's turn back to Andrew Copson in the studio here. I mean, a lot of people that I've talked to in preparation for this interview have suggested that, you know, the case that was brought in Devon, I mean, it was a bit over the top, wasn't it? I mean, you know, it is a specific example of militant secularism that isn't necessary, isn't needed. Why go all the way through the courts?
I don't see what's militant about it. I mean, that case was triggered by a councillor who, not being a Christian himself, didn't understand why, when he was trying to serve the whole of the local community of which he was a part, in a civic role, which should not be to do with religion but to do with our public life, didn't see why he had to be part of an institution that had Christian prayers on its formal agenda. And I think that's a totally legitimate case.
But what about the point that Anne's making?
No
a
one
lot
was
of people
stopping other people praying, by the way, if they wanted to.
Tolerance.
Well, of course, tolerance is absolutely
is
to
that,
be encouraged.
But is that, indeed, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of tolerance on the part of some of those who do believe that, you know, this isn't a Christian country, for instance, and would bang the drum as far as that's
intolerance would have been if in the council prayer case the judge had said you may not pray in council meetings at all. That's not what he said. He said you can't put prayers onto part of the formal agenda as if they were, you know, there for everyone in the whole institution. No one was stopping anyone praying, and this one case has been really, frankly, blown out of all proportion. If it's the best evidence that can be offered for militant, intolerant, illiberal secularism, then it's completely over the top. The real cases that people at the hard edge of, that have to do with religion or belief in society today, are ones where primarily non-Christians are discriminated against, like, for example, in the third of our state-funded schools that admit on religious grounds. There are no schools in this country from which the children of Christian parents are barred by law. There are many schools in this country, state-funded schools, from which the children of non-Christian parents are barred by law. That's the real story, I think, and this sort of manufactured narrative of outrage, which goes along with these, you know, fake cries for tolerance, which really are a way of preserving privilege, flies in the face of the actual reality of the situation.
Okay, Anne Atkins, you heard all that, and we did have, of course, that Ipsos Mori poll that suggested that most people feel religion shouldn't influence public policy. 92% agreed
most
the law
Christians, that's
should...
most Christians, most self-described Christians.
Indeed, 92% agreed the law should apply to everyone equally, regardless of their personal beliefs. 61% of Christians agreed homosexuals should have the same legal rights in all aspects of their lives as heterosexuals.
Of course homosexuals should have the same legal rights.
So it's a pretty tolerant society we're living in then, clearly, according to this poll.
Yeah, but just if I could go back over some of what Andrew was saying, it's not true that non-Christian children are barred from state schools, from Church of England schools. It is true that there is a certain quota for church-going families, and I agree that that is not... Well, it's not what Christianity is about, and I don't think it should be what Church of England schools are about, and there are a lot of Christians who think the same, that there should be the same entry requirements for non-Christians and Christians and churchgoers and non-churchgoers to Church of England schools. But it's very interesting that a lot of families still favour Church of England schools, a lot of non-Christian families, and a lot of people in the poll that you mentioned that we heard of today. It's very interesting that a lot of people who don't necessarily hold with a lot of what we think of as Christianity still want to align themselves with the Christianity that they see as historically of this nation. And I find that very interesting. If you turn the survey on its head and say, why do these people who, you know, a lot of people who don't necessarily see Jesus as the Son of God, why do they want to call themselves Christians? It's a fascinating, you know, finding. But just to go back on
the survey actually asked them why they call themselves Christians, and the most frequently given reason was because they were christened as a child, and another frequently given reason was that it was the religion of their parents, and only 28% of those people said it was because they believed believed in the teachings of Christianity.
Well,
so that's a pretty attenuated...
Yes, but again, that's
Christianity.
very interesting because they're wanting to align themselves to something that's sort of historic and not necessarily personal. And I mean, we could have the whole debate on that. Let's not do that because
And we
it's
don't
been
have the time
debated
for that.
nauseam today. But just to sort of go back to what this debate is about, which is about this aggressive, angry sort of side of atheism that many people are perceiving. And there can be an angry side to faith and religion as well, and one has to acknowledge that and apologise for it, and we don't want that either. But just sort of going back to something personal, a few years ago I was doing Thought for the Day on the Today programme, and in the same programme Richard Dawkins was doing a sort of non-Thought for the Day after me in the programme, that he had the same two and three-quarter minutes that I had. And what was fascinating was that he didn't talk about humanism, he didn't talk about his beliefs, he didn't open our minds to all sorts of things we didn't know. All he did was he was simply angry about Christianity for 2 3/4 minutes. And I thought, that is absolutely fascinating. What is it? What is the chip on this man's shoulder that he can't talk about anything else except Christianity?
Well, Richard Dawkins isn't here to
No,
respond to that and to defend himself.
But that's what we mean by aggressive atheism.
Okay, but we do have Andrew Copson here. You've got a chip on your shoulder, or some in the movement
Andrew
have a chip on their shoulder.
Thanks, Anne.
You're just angry about everything. I mean,
No, I'm not angry at all.
I'm not saying Andrew.
I'm getting angry. I'm perfectly willing to and happy to tolerate Anne's Christian beliefs, just as she's willing to see my beliefs as part of the tolerant mix in society. But what I don't think toleration needs to entail is one set of beliefs, Christian beliefs, being privileged in our state or in our society. And I think that's what makes people who are not Christians angry, and I think it's legitimate anger.
Okay. Anne Atkins and Andrew Copson, it's great to have you both with us. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.